How's it going, dudes, ladies, and gentlemen? I'm Johnny Bankman, and today we're going to be talking about Elden Ring. It's been a little over a month since the game was released, and oh man, do I have a lot to say about it. I will likely have more to discuss in future videos about this absolute unit of a game, but for now, let the fire spur you, let's get into it. Firstly, I can't talk on this topic without specifying that I am a Souls veteran, having fallen in love with Dark Souls 1 back in 2013-ish. Since then, I played every FromSoft title I could get my hands on. I've wanted to give that context to acknowledge that Elden Ring was always going to be something I enjoyed playing. Miyazaki and the team at From have delivered time and time again, such that I am always excited to see what new direction they will take things. Sekiro was an amazing change of pace for the studio, but personally, I am happy to see it return to form with a lot of the mechanics in Elden Ring. The game seems to draw on gameplay and design aspects from all of their previous titles, and they all coalesce into an invigorating and immersive experience. By this point, if you're watching this video, you probably get the general idea of the game. Maybe you've heard it described as open world Dark Souls or Breath of the Wild Dark Souls, but in my experience, it is far more than that would imply. The Dark Souls series has consistently fallen into my top 3 favorite games since I was actually able to play through the first one. That sentiment touches on why I'm so impressed with Elden Ring, and what FromSoft has managed to pull off here. A quick but relevant aside is that when I first purchased Dark Souls, I expected something in the vein of Darksiders or maybe Oblivion. What I was met with was not that. After a solid hour of stupidly running headfirst into a Asylum Demon with no weapons, finally figuring out where to get a sword, and then immediately getting obliterated by skeletons outside a Firelink Shrine, enemies that seemed pretty basic and unthreatening at the time, I decided this game is impossible, probably took it back to GameStop. The clerk was surprised I was returning it so soon and said he had heard it was a good title, but seemed to immediately understand when I told him it was far too difficult, almost as if he had heard that before. I went a couple of years without even thinking about the game again, but then my buddy Zion came to school and asked if I had played it. He flipped out when I told him I had given up, and he had me go to his house to play a bit more to really see if I couldn't get the gameplay down. He showed me the path I was meant to go down and helped me through the countless ambushes and to find the best weapons that really set me up for success. And with his help, I eventually beat the game. And then I beat it again alone. I wanted to tell that story because I often hear that Dark Souls games, or From titles in general, are too difficult and can be inaccessible, and as a fan who persisted through the frustrations that come with being unable to beat a difficult area, or choking at the last moment against a seemingly impossible boss fight, I want to push back against that. But then I look back at my own experiences and I realize if I didn't have Zion's advice and direction, I likely would have never even picked up the game for a second time. The unique issue that a game like Elden Ring faces is that they have a reputation for difficulty, one that has grown even more ubiquitous as time goes on. They have to cater somewhat to that expectation, because if they don't, their core fan base may feel like they're being ignored or left behind, as a sense of accomplishment given by games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring are often large selling points for those players. So how can they make a game that is both difficult and accessible? I would argue that they've always been possible to beat with only a small amount of skill as long as you put the necessary time and effort in. Specifically though, Elden Ring has possibly done it the best of any From game or any game in recent memory for that matter. They have managed to create a standard of difficulty that the player completely controls, and not only that, but in which the player holds an active part in changing. It is due to this reason, and many more, I wholeheartedly recommend this game to anyone who is even the least bit interested in it. Allow me to elaborate. Firstly, let's discuss the core gameplay loop. If you're a Dark Souls fan, you'll be pretty familiar with the pacing of Elden Ring. The combat is like a dance in these games, and the backing track changes across titles. Bloodborne is like metal music, Sekiro is probably closest to rap, and Dark Souls is like a grand classical piece. Elden Ring is closest to the latter, but they've changed the meter in such a way that even Souls veterans will take some time to find the rhythm. I think jazz is an apt comparison for Elden Ring in this metaphor. Bosses will hold their attack just a moment longer than you suspect before letting loose with a rapid series of blows that sometimes takes perfect timing to dodge, and they will often mix up their attack patterns just to keep you on your toes. There's a swing feel to the tempo of combat, and many times it takes practice to get in sync with each new opponent. Other than surviving harsh combat encounters, clearing enemy encampments, and testing your build with or against other players in the unique multiplayer, your time will be spent discovering new items, storylines, and helpful NPCs along the way. You can also hunt animals for supplies if you rather save the runes. Don't worry if your hunting isn't your thing, almost everything animals drop can be purchased eventually. Just be prepared to pay extra for your soft-heartedness. This game is immense and absolutely brimming with content, but they never force you into blindly picking up every item you see. If that's what you want, then you can maximize your inventory to your heart's content, but many of the areas and pickups are optional for completion. Speaking of optional areas, let's talk a bit about the world design in Elden Ring. It is a sprawling expanse. Each time you think you found the final bounds of the map, you find a new area to explore, and that continues all the way through to the end of the game. The diversity in landscapes is more than enough to keep the world feeling fresh and alive. An arcane, flooded city built around a magnificent academy. A snow-covered mountaintop littered with the corpses of a destructive and ancient war. A morose peninsula where torrential rains pour over the bodies of the fallen like tears for the lost, and brutalized servants revel in bloodthirsty revolt. These landscapes are all both beautiful and sorrowful, each feeling handcrafted to portray the story of the lands you are visiting. You can walk into an area and blast through all the enemies and pick up all the items, not thinking twice about the landscape, but in doing so, you will miss out on the little story details that are integrated into the world that make it feel that much more immersive and will drive you forward with more questions and curiosity. The enemies interact with the landscape in a way that both humanizes them and puts their place in the greater story into perspective, which in turn helps magnify just how significant your own journey is. A good example of this are enemies later in the game that are found kneeling or sitting in gravestones, which isn't in itself odd as gravestones are all over the lands between. These soldiers, however, were left behind to defend the city during the war in which nearly all of their most elite soldiers were killed, let alone the rank and file. You realize that these soldiers are actually mourning their losses, and not only that, but that their detection range is lowered because they are absorbed in thought about the ones they cared for. These little things are all over the game, and they both humanize enemies that could easily be viewed only as obstacles to overcome, and make the world feel more immersive to live in. You can choose to engage with the world to whatever degree fits you personally. If you want to scour every inch of it, there's more than enough to keep you entertained and searching for more, but if you just want to rush through every encounter as fast as possible, they've created a world that is more interconnected and easier to maneuver than ever before. That ability to appeal to vastly different expectations and desires brings me to the new mechanics of the game and how certain design choices make this the most accessible From title by far, while also holding some of the greatest challenges for the veterans. Right at the start, you can see how they tweak the game to appeal to many different types of players. Once you die in the chapel and wake up in the stranded graveyard, there are a few things that may immediately stick out to you your first time through. Two of which, for me, were the large door across the cavern and the glowing ghost. Having decided I wanted to scour through the game as much as possible and as blindly as possible on my first playthrough, I checked out the door, saw what was probably the path forward, and turned around to take the plunge as instructed by our emaciated glowing friend. Once I started to progress through the cave system I jumped down into, I realized I was in the tutorial area and the genius of this slight design change. The tutorial in Souls games has always been pretty unforgiving and sets a tone for the rest of the game. Many players, myself included, very much enjoy the tutorial bosses upon the first few times we encounter it, but the novelty quickly wears off and it often becomes more of a hassle for new runs rather than a challenge. This is especially problematic for speedrunners, as every new attempt has to start with that boss, and it very quickly becomes somewhat immature. FromSoft has addressed this while also not alienating new players by making the tutorial area optional. Now I can already hear the criticism that being able to miss a tutorial area without being explicitly asked to opt out defeats the purpose of a tutorial. My counterpoint is that missing the tutorial area is part of the tutorial. Elden Ring, more so than any Souls game before it, is about exploration and discovery as well as persisting in the face of adversity through trial and error. If you walked past the tutorial area, you'll likely run smack into the tree sentinel and be utterly obliterated by the smug golden bastard. Some players might find this annoying or feel like this mini boss is just placed here to troll them, but the design is fully intentional. If you are tired of getting smashed into jelly as a new player, you'll likely decide to give up fighting him, and as far as the game tells you, the critical path is past him, so your options are to either explore other pathways to get around him, or to turn back and check out why Casper wanted you to jump into that seemingly fatal chasm. You've already died a couple times at this point, so what do you have to lose? And that thought is key to success in Elden Ring. Recognizing that you aren't prepared for this challenge, and that the best path forward is often to backtrack or to go through another area entirely, is crucial to success, because it allows you to grow and learn outside of whatever obstacle is brickwalling you. Of course, then the tutorial ends, and the tree sentinel doesn't get any easier. You aren't given some quick fix or told about a secret weak spot to make the fight any less difficult, and that is an intentional design choice as well, and another lesson to be learned in the tutorial. Sometimes, just going back through the areas nearby and practicing a bit won't be enough. and there's no shame in leaving a fight for another day to explore the surrounding world and gain experience, both in-game and in reality. I wanted to really go in depth in the opening area and the lessons I was able to learn from the design choices there, because they then continue to hammer home those ideas throughout the rest of the intro to the game, at least until Godric for certain. They set increasingly difficult challenges in front of you to show you this is a game that will be much easier and more enjoyable if you think through your actions rather than blindly throw yourself at the areas you're being directed towards, and that tactical retreat is more than a valid option. Aside from the more subtle design features that help to teach players what types of challenges they will face and how to be better prepared to handle them, they also have implemented a few new mechanics that are wonderful additions to the combat and make it feel much more approachable. First off is jumping, which was one of the first things I took note of, but I did not realize how useful it was going to be in combat. Dark Souls has admittedly terrible jump mechanics, and I often would only use them when absolutely necessary. Not the case in Elden Ring. Jumping helps in many ways, but the most useful one for new players will be jump attacks. Jump attacks are an absolute game changer, as they make it quick and easy to close the distance between yourself and an opponent, while also dealing damage and possibly staggering them. Many players struggle with spacing and finding windows of attack that they won't be punished for, and jumping attacks can address both of those issues at once. Guard counters are also new, and can be extremely helpful for struggling players to experiment with and eventually integrate into their gameplay. They allow you to dish out damage and break an enemy stance, while also having the relative safety afforded by a shield, or even just blocking with your weapon. As an added benefit, guard counters push new players who may be having difficulty with the game to also experiment with shields, which can make the game much more manageable. Skills from Dark Souls 3 have been adapted and further fleshed out into the Ashes of War system that allows you to customize each weapon with different properties and special moves, some of which are incredibly powerful and can make many fights, even bosses, feel trivial by comparison. Here's a short showcase of some of my favorites that I've found so far. They also integrated the infusion mechanic from previous games into the Ashes of War system, which makes it much easier to change your weapon from poison to blood to heavy to lightning, and the many options in between. This means players who have found a weapon they like won't feel pressured into leaving it behind because it doesn't quite fit the build they are going for. Lastly, let's talk about summons. Summons in Elden Ring are essentially FromSoft's answer to people asking for a sliding difficulty bar. There are tons of summons in the game, ranging in everything from an old man who couldn't be bothered to learn more than the most basic spell available, to an ethereal pack of wolves, to a legendary assassin implicated in a deicide to help you face the horrors of the land between. Crucially, these summons are often available to help you clear difficult areas of enemies as well as the boss of an area. This puts control of how difficult certain encounters will be directly into the hands of the player, and gives them an idea of how an encounter will change when they make that decision. The problem with allowing players to just have a sliding bar that changes stat values or something of that nature is that players aren't game designers, and they don't understand the full weight of what such a change will mean to how they will experience the rest of the game. With the summons, however, a player can learn the strengths and weaknesses of their favorite summon and use them for encounters they are struggling with a full understanding of how that will impact the fight ahead. Summons allow less skilled players to face the game confidently and to not feel as though they are hopeless to beat a boss or area, let alone the game, because they give the player something to fall back on without actually impacting the challenge itself. Malenia is an incredibly difficult boss. Malenia is still that with summons, it just affords players additional tactical options. Here's an example of what I mean. Here, I'm fighting Moog, and after a few tries, I realized that after the explosions from the second phase, he's just too aggressive for me to beat him without the extra flasks I was losing to that explosion. So, I was gonna give up and go look for the item I assumed I had missed, a hunch that was reinforced by a helpful tip outside the boss fog I originally ignored. But then I decided to try to do it without that item, and instead with the summon's help. I switched to bleed weapons and used my mimic summon to help stack bleed and allow me to play more aggressively in return. And after a handful of pretty close tries, and some more tilted ones, I was able to beat it with even less flasks because of my mimic. Nothing about Moog changed, I was just able to face him once I rethought my tactics and had a little assistance. Many aspects of Elden Ring, and Souls games as a whole, echo the way things work in real life. On that note, I want to emphasize that asking for help is nothing to be ashamed of in life and in Elden Ring, especially when it comes to the lore and some of the more confusing NPC quest lines. There's a wealth of lore in this game, and similarly to the setting, they crafted a story that feels complexly interconnected and alive. That being said, they don't force you to engage with the story any more than you want to. All cutscenes are skippable, and it is more than possible to complete the game without even knowing why you just defeated all the bosses. It is a bold design choice, as many players may miss out on a full understanding of the weight of their actions within the world and feel daunted by the density of the lore. Though this could easily be painted as a negative, and it is definitely a rarity among games today, the immersion it adds to the game and the incentive it provides the community to discuss, theorize, and share discoveries is more than worth the cost. It is fitting that George R. R. Martin is a consultant for the story of Elden Ring, as a lot of the lore and design aspects involve the ideas that made Game of Thrones such a beloved TV show, of course barring the ending. Both stories rely on the person interacting with the piece to make a thoughtful effort to untangle an intricate story that is rife with subtext and implied meanings. Much of the foundation of the story in Elden Ring isn't told through cutscenes or even dialogue, but rather item descriptions and the world itself. This allows players to feel a more active role in unraveling the story. You'll see an enemy that is out of place in an area and wonder why they're there, and then two factions of enemies will begin to fight, and you'll realize that they were likely on opposing sides of the Shattering, and even now are still making ill-fated attempts at fulfilling their lord's respective wills. This could lead you to question what motivates the entities at the top to have caused such destructive chaos to the world and to each other. Or you can think, that's weird, the enemies are fighting each other, but it helps me out, and go on about your business. Either playstyle is valid, doubly so when you consider there are people like Vidya who make incredible breakdowns of the lore, but I would recommend that you slow down, try to piece the story together for yourself first, and then use the community to help fill in the gaps. Doing so makes searching through the world, collecting items, and planning a course through the land feel so much more rewarding, as well as giving you more time to appreciate the story being told in each environment. Bonus points if you find a hidden pathway because you were searching for items or checking out an area that looked like it could have lore significance. No game has ever made me feel quite as excited to pick up an item I know I will never use in my kit, because every item in this game has a small tatter of the story to tell, or possibly crucial information. Some items more than others maybe, but the game is dripping with flavor, all of which contains consistent and meaningful payoff. The story is a kaleidoscope of betrayal, loss, hope, destruction, and rebirth, every area adding more color and depth to the lens through which you view the world and its characters. These are just a few reasons why after the first 200 hours, I will always call Elden Ring an artistic masterpiece, one of the best in gaming. It is not because it is technically impressive. I had several issues with the game crashing at the worst times, including on my way through the final boss fog. It is not because of the mind-blowing gameplay innovations. I think what they added is great, but there are a few reused concepts and assets. It is not because the graphics are the best I've ever seen. I think the visuals are beautiful, but there are some games that are nearly indiscernible from live action at this point. What makes Elden Ring a masterpiece is difficult to sum up, and it isn't often found in your average game ranking or review system. It is the love and intent that this game exudes from every facet of its design. They set out with a clear goal in mind and poured everything they had into making sure that goal was achieved. They had themes to discuss, stories to tell, and lessons to teach, and then passionately built upon that foundation. FromSoft listened to the community and never swayed from their original vision in the face of catering to a wider and possibly more lucrative market, but also found ways to improve that vision such that more people can enjoy this quote-unquote spicy game, as Miyazaki may call it. To extend that metaphor, Elden Ring is a game in which there is milk and ice cream for those who need a break from the heat, and extra hot sauce for the masochists. From has created an experience that has a beautiful world to explore and interact with, a story that is internally consistent, meaningful, and moving, and fantastically designed bosses and enemies to challenge you. Elden Ring accomplishes all of that while also teaching life lessons and having something important to say. I touched briefly on it when I was discussing the tutorial section, but nearly all of the harsh lessons Elden Ring has to teach you are applicable to life as well. There are no substitutions for time and effort. Sometimes you need to redirect and try a different strategy. There is nothing wrong with relying on a hand from your community from time to time, but there are some challenges that you must face alone. Everyone dies. Change is inevitable, and you may prolong it for a bit, but the longer you resist, the further the eventual fall will be. Facing change and new challenges are the only way to truly move forward. These are just some of the lessons I learned in my 200 hours in the world of Elden Ring, and why I believe it should be regarded as a true artistic masterpiece.